Almost 1 million Americans wake up every single morning, unbuckle their seatbelts, step out onto the pavement of a commercial parking lot, and get ready for work. Not between jobs, not recovering from a sudden string of bad luck, permanently. And here is the exact detail that turns this entire story on its head. Most of them will put on a uniform, pin on an ID badge, or grab a lunchbox and drive straight to a shift. They are registered nurses, public school teachers, Amazon warehouse associates, and logistics coordinators. People with health insurance, clean credit histories, and 6 years of unbroken tenure at the same company. They aren't sleeping in the back of a sedan because they gave up on life. They are sleeping there because the underlying mathematics of modern survival simply stopped adding up. Rent went up 42% across the country. Wages grew by 18%. That 24-point gap didn't just create an inconvenience, it formed an absolute abyss into which nearly 1 million working human beings just fell. To actually understand how a primary global superpower managed to quietly convert its parking lots into residential neighborhoods, you have to look at 4 specific numbers that almost never appear in the same headline. 4 metrics kept strictly separated by policy analysts, real estate brokers, and cable news cycles. Look at what happens when you lay them side by side on a table. First, average residential rent in the United States jumped by 42% between 2013 and 2025. Second, real wage growth over that exact same time frame reached just 18%. Third, the population of what social scientists call the vehicularly unhoused nearly doubled since 2018, exploding from under 500,000 to almost 900,000 people today. Fourth, over 60% of those 900,000 people hold down an active, steady job right now. These statistics are routinely fed to the public in isolated, digestible bites, dropped weeks apart in different economic reports. Nobody links them together, but the moment you line them up, the comfortable narrative about personal responsibility completely disintegrates. This is not a story about 1 million people who lazily stopped trying. This is the cold, mechanical reality of arithmetic breaking down, and 900,000 working citizens living in the wreckage of that failure every single night. That 24-point gap isn't some abstract statistical variance discussed in university lecture halls. It is the literal physical distance between what shelter costs and what labor actually pays. Take someone earning $19 an hour. On paper, that sounds respectable. In many mid-sized American towns, local employers advertise $19 as a competitive living wage. After state and federal taxes, that worker takes home roughly $2,500 a month. Now look at the local real estate market. A basic 1-bedroom apartment in Phoenix, Tampa, Austin, or Boise currently sits anywhere between $1,600 and $2,000 a month. That leaves precisely $700. Not for luxury, for groceries, gas, car insurance, a prescription refill, and whatever else it takes to stay alive for 30 days. There is zero structural tolerance in that math. Not a single dollar of margin for error. One blown head gasket, one ER visit, or one spike in utility rates instantly triggers a financial collapse. Financial planners used to preach an ironclad rule: never allocate more than 30% of your gross income towards housing. By 2026, millions of full-time workers are routinely forced to hand over 50 to 65% of their paychecks just to keep a key to a front door. Not because they are living recklessly, but because that is simply the baseline admission price for basic shelter. In places like Phoenix or Boise, rent didn't just rise, it spiked 60 to 90% in under a decade. A standard 1-bedroom unit that rented for $900 in 2015 now commands nearly double. Wages attempting to chase that trajectory were doomed from the start. So what actually happens when paying rent becomes a mathematical impossibility? People adapt. They always do. Some stack 3 generations into a 2-bedroom unit, burning through privacy and sanity. Others take on a second shift, trading 15 hours a day for an extra 3 hours of miserable sleep and a 90-minute commute each way. Thousands sign up for public housing waitlists, sitting in administrative queues for years, waiting for vouchers that never materialize. And then, a massive, quiet demographic pulls out a calculator, looks at their savings, and starts browsing used RVs on Craigslist. Buying an old, second-hand camper or a high-mileage van costs between $8,000 and $12,000 up front. No background checks, no credit score thresholds, no lease agreements, and zero risk of an institutional investment firm buying out your building next quarter and jacking up the rent by $300 overnight. Compare that to sinking $24,000 a year into a rental unit you can barely afford, where a landlord can terminate your tenancy on a whim, and suddenly, living in a vehicle doesn't look like a breakdown of judgment. It looks like the only rational financial calculation left on the board. It isn't irresponsibility. It's simple arithmetic. Except nobody tells you what happens the second you turn that key and make the move official. Because the moment your car becomes your primary residence, a massive cascade of hidden administrative, physical, and legal traps slams shut around you. The catastrophe unfolding in America's parking lots did not materialize out of thin air overnight. It was built brick by brick, law by law, and board meeting by board meeting over the course of 3 decades. To understand why a nurse in Phoenix or a school employee in Boise is sleeping in a Ford Transit van today, you have to trace the timeline back to the smoking ruins of the 2008 subprime mortgage crash. When the housing bubble burst, it didn't just wipe out trillions of dollars in household equity, it crippled the American homebuilding industry at its roots. Small and mid-sized residential contractors went bankrupt by the thousands. Millions of experienced carpenters, plumbers, and electricians left the construction trade entirely and never returned. Between 2006 and 2009, single-family home construction in the United States plummeted by over 75%, collapsing from an annualized rate of 2.2 million new starts to fewer than 500,000. For an entire decade following that collapse, the nation built fewer housing units per capita than in almost any decade since the Great Depression. By 2020, federal mortgage giant Freddie Mac estimated that the U.S. housing market faced a structural deficit of 3.8 million homes. By 2025, that deficit expanded past 4.3 million units. Supply was severely restricted, but population growth did not pause. While home builders were stalled, local municipal governments quietly reinforced a geographic trap that guaranteed prices would soar: single-family exclusive zoning codes. Across major metropolitan regions, from Los Angeles and Seattle to Atlanta, Charlotte, and Austin, local zoning boards reserved between 70 and 85% of all residential land exclusively for detached, single-family homes on individual lots. Under these local municipal ordinances, building a duplex, a triplex, or a modest 8-unit apartment block was not just difficult, it was outright illegal across vast swaths of urban land. This legal architecture handed enormous power to existing homeowners and local neighborhood associations. Any time a developer proposed an affordable multifamily housing project, suburban planning commissions were inundated with lawsuits, traffic studies, and environmental appeals. Projects were tied up in court for years until developers abandoned them or converted them into luxury condominiums to cover their escalating legal fees. The result was an artificial bottleneck where entry-level housing was practically outlawed. Then came the financialization of American residential shelter. In the immediate wake of the 2008 foreclosure crisis, millions of families were evicted from their homes. Wall Street private equity firms recognized an unprecedented asset grab opportunity. Backed by billions of dollars in low-interest credit lines from global investment banks, institutional firms entered the residential housing market for the first time in American history. Companies like Invitation Homes, American Homes for Rent, and private equity giants like Blackstone began purchasing foreclosed single-family homes in bulk, buying thousands of properties directly off courthouse steps at steep discounts. What began as a distress asset strategy quickly became a permanent business model. Corporate landlords realized that a family forced out of home ownership still required a place to live, transforming them into a permanent pool of renters. Between 2011 and 2022, private equity and institutional investors poured over $100 billion into buying single-family homes across the Sun Belt. In key markets like Atlanta, Phoenix, Tampa, and Charlotte, corporate entities bought up to 20 to 30% of all single-family residential sales in specific zip codes during peak acquisition waves. These institutional buyers did not compete on equal terms with local families. They brought all-cash offers, waived inspection contingencies, and closed transactions in days. First-time home buyers relying on conventional mortgages were systematically priced out of the market. Once corporate landlords established dominant market share in targeted neighborhoods, they implemented aggressive price optimization algorithms. Software programs like RealPage's YieldStar allowed corporate landlords to coordinate pricing strategies across entire metropolitan regions. Instead of competing for tenants by lowering rents, the software advised property managers to leave units vacant rather than cut prices, artificially driving up regional rent baselines by 15 to 30% in a matter of years. The fragile balance collapsed completely between 2020 and 2024. The onset of remote work triggered a massive demographic migration from high-cost coastal hubs like San Francisco, Los Angeles, and New York toward lower-cost Sunbelt cities. Tech workers and corporate executives making $150,000 to $250,000 a year relocated to markets like Boise, Idaho, Austin, Texas, and Tampa, Florida. Local housing markets in these mid-sized cities were overwhelmed almost instantly. In Boise, Idaho, where the median local wage sat around $45,000, home prices jumped by 70% in under 4 years, while average apartment rents jumped by nearly 60%. Local service workers, medical assistants, and logistics employees making $16 to $22 an hour were outbid by out-of-state buyers with high-income remote salaries. During the height of the pandemic, the federal government temporarily cushioned the blow. Emergency measures, including federal eviction moratoria and the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, which distributed over $46 billion to struggling tenants, kept millions of families housed. But these measures were built as temporary stopgaps, not structural reforms. When federal rental assistance funds ran dry by late 2023 and court-ordered eviction moratoria were struck down by legal challenges, no permanent safety net remained. Eviction filings surged back to 120 to 150% of pre-pandemic levels across major Sunbelt cities. At the same time, inflation pushed the cost of food, utility bills, and auto insurance up by over 20%, while real wage growth stalled out. The emergency protections disappeared, but the inflated housing costs stayed permanently fixed at their peak levels. Families who had used up their savings to survive the inflationary spike suddenly found themselves facing rent increases they could not pay. With public housing waitlists sealed and homeless shelters operating well past capacity, hundreds of thousands of employed workers were left with a single functional asset that offered both shelter and mobility: the vehicle parked in their driveway. By 2026, the clash between municipal authorities and the growing population of vehicle residents reached a critical tipping point across the United States. Following the landmark U.S. Supreme Court decision in City of Grants Pass versus Gloria Johnson, local governments received unprecedented legal authority to penalize individuals sleeping in vehicles or on public property, even when public shelters lacked available beds. In the 2 years following the ruling, more than 350 cities and 14 states enacted or expanded strict public camping and vehicular habitation bans. Municipal strategies shifted rapidly from passive tolerance to active legal enforcement. In major metropolitan areas across California, Texas, Florida, and Washington, city councils passed ordinances prohibiting overnight parking in commercial zones, restricting vehicle height and weight on public streets, and capping continuous parking limits at 2 to 4 hours. Municipalities deployed automated license plate recognition systems mounted on patrol vehicles to continuously scan street curbs, automatically issuing civil citations to vehicles parked beyond legal limits. In Los Angeles alone, parking enforcement officers issued over 17,000 citations to vehicle residents in a single 12-month period, while city agencies conducted dozens of coordinated street sweeps monthly. In Florida, state legislation banned overnight public sleeping outright, requiring local jurisdictions to enforce strict prohibitions unless vehicles were parked in designated, regulated campgrounds. The financial mechanisms of these enforcement policies created a destructive trap for working vehicle dwellers. Initial parking citations ranging from $75 to $250 frequently escalated to over $500 if unpaid within 30 days. Accumulated unpaid tickets triggered immediate vehicle registration holds through state departments of motor vehicles. Under state laws, driving a vehicle with an expired registration or unpaid municipal holds provided legal grounds for immediate police stops, vehicle impoundment, and asset seizure. Once a vehicle, functioning as a primary home, was towed to a private impound lot, the administrative and storage fees spiraled rapidly out of reach. Daily impound storage fees averaged $100 to $200 per day, with initial towing charges ranging from $500 to $1,500. For an individual living on a monthly income of $1,800 to $2,500, reclaiming an impounded vehicle required lump sum payments often exceeding $3,000 to $6,000 within a strict 15 to 30-day window. Failure to pay resulted in the public auction or scrapping of the vehicle, permanently stripping the owner of their shelter, personal clothing, medical prescriptions, legal identification, and trade tools required for employment. Simultaneously, the private safety valves that previously accommodated vehicle residents were systematically dismantled. For decades, major national retail chains, freight truck stops, and 24-hour commercial centers maintained an informal policy allowing long-distance travelers and vehicle dwellers to park overnight. Beginning in 2023, corporate headquarters reversed these practices due to rising property insurance premiums, municipal liability pressures, and private security costs. Retail parking lots were equipped with private security patrols, physical height restriction barriers, and towing enforcement contracts, eliminating hundreds of thousands of informal parking spaces nationwide. Public infrastructure options failed to scale anywhere near the level of demand. Safe parking programs, municipal or non-profit initiatives providing gated, secure parking lots equipped with security guards, portable restrooms, and social services demonstrated measurable success where implemented. Studies from programs in San Diego and Santa Barbara showed that up to 40% of participants successfully transitioned back into permanent residential housing within 6 to 12 months, twice the success rate of traditional congregate shelters. However, capacity remained severely constrained. In major urban centers home to an estimated 5,000 to 10,000 vehicle residents, municipal safe parking programs offered fewer than 200 to 300 total permitted spaces, with waiting lists extending for over 9 months. State and local funding allocations favored criminal enforcement and physical displacement over the expansion of managed parking infrastructure. California cities spent over $750 million on encampment clearance, towing operations, and enforcement patrols, producing 0 net units of permanent affordable housing or long-term shelter beds. This aggressive displacement pushed vehicle dwellers out of urban centers into remote industrial corridors, agricultural floodplains, and unlit desert bypasses. These isolated zones lacked basic public health infrastructure, including potable water access, trash collection, and mobile telecommunications coverage. According to municipal crime reports, vehicle break-ins, property theft, and physical assaults targeting vehicle dwellers in unmonitored industrial areas increased by 25 to 40% between 2021 and 2025. Furthermore, extreme environmental conditions introduced life-threatening hazards. During extreme summer heat waves in western states, interior temperatures inside uninsulated metal vans and older recreational vehicles routinely exceeded 120 degrees Fahrenheit, 50 degrees Celsius. Public health records from Arizona, Nevada, and California documented a doubling of heat-related mortality among unsheltered seniors living in vehicles since 2019. In winter months, attempts to heat vehicle interiors using portable propane stoves resulted in spikes in carbon monoxide poisoning and catastrophic vehicular fires. The demographic burden of this crisis shifted dramatically toward vulnerable populations. State housing surveys conducted across the American West revealed that adults over the age of 55 accounted for nearly 40% of all individuals residing in motor vehicles. These seniors, living on fixed Social Security benefits averaging $1,750 per month, were systematically priced out of rental markets, where basic studio apartments averaged $1,500 to $1,800. Additionally, federal educational tracking data indicated that over 420,000 public school students across the country experienced vehicular homelessness during the academic year, struggling with chronic absenteeism, nutritional instability, and severe developmental disruption. The convergence of legal criminalization, private market exclusion, and structural housing shortages transformed what began as a temporary economic coping mechanism into an inescapable national dead end.